Hey, welcome to the Church Explained podcast, a conversation to grow your leadership and build your church. I'm so pleased today we've got an amazing guest a whole way from Orlando in Florida, or Florida, Orlando, whatever way round it is. And Petr Buzyan. How does that sound, Petr Buzyan? Does that sound all right?
You know what? I got to say, you gave it a good go, and it sounds good, Dave.
Yeah, give it a good go. Hey, Petr, great to have you with us on the show today.
Man, it's a pleasure, Dave. Honestly, just to hear what you and the team and just as a church, what you guys are doing, it's incredible. So truly an honor to be on here. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Hey, let me just share with our guests and our listeners a little bit about you, and then we'll dig in a bit deeper just to find out a bit more about your details and background. But you sent through a little short bio, which is brilliant, because sometimes when people send these through, when we say short, actually they're not so short, but yours is pretty good today. So Petr, we found out actually you are married to Jess, and you've been married for almost 7 years. You've got an 8-month-old son called Emerson. And fantastic. And you've described you're in that little phase where lots of snuggles, but lack of sleep. But you're looking okay today, so well done.
Yep, well, that's true.
It's got to be done. So you're involved, you're part of the Elevation Church and part of launching the location in Orlando, the 20th Elevation location, which is pretty amazing, actually. So, yeah, great to see what God's doing there. You say God's really at work. He's planted it sort of in 2020. God's been working. And we want to find out a bit more about all the stuff that's happening there in Orlando, besides the amazing weather, for those who are in more darker climates. So, hey, Petr, great to have you with us on the show.
It really is, Dave. Honestly, I'm excited. Excited to hear. I mean, I think what you're doing with this podcast and giving not just leaders a chance to grow, but also leaders a chance to grow in the churches they're involved. You know, if God's given us a local church, and the goal is that we steward it well, and healthy churches grow. And so you want it to be healthy. You want to be healthy as a leader, and the fact that you create a resource in a space like this for people just shows how much you care about the local church. So honored to be here.
Brilliant, yeah. So listen, we want to take a bit of a dive in, find out a little bit about you. So I wonder if you'd be willing just to share a little bit about your faith story and your ministry journey, and then we'll break that down and find out a little bit more about your family and what you do for fun. So why don't we kick off with that? Tell us a little bit about your faith story and your ministry journey so far.
I grew up in a church my whole life. You know, my family, prioritized church to be in the house of God every single Sunday. I'm talking fever or no fever. You showing up to church, and why wouldn't you show up with the fever to church? You might get a healing. You know, it was one of those like, hey,
I like it.
There's every reason you should go. You know, 2 feet of snow. Hey, I know everyone else is canceling church, but we're going to church. And that was just the way I grew up. So, faith was important to us and my mom and dad, and had an older and a younger brother. And so growing up in the church was absolutely something familiar to me. But of course, it's one thing to come to church and attend every single week. It's another thing to actually have a personal relationship with Jesus. And so I want to say, as I grew up as a kid into my early teenage and adult life, I believed there was a God, but I just said, you know what? I'm young. I want to live life. And so I did. I was young and I lived life, and I went to church on a Sunday. And so I grew up, loved sports and athletics. So I played soccer my whole life, and my goal was to become a soccer player, a professional soccer player. And so I ended up, going to college. And so, like I said, I grew up in the church. And so to kind of give you the background, my faith stories, went every Sunday. But then when I went to college, I got a scholarship to playing on this team. And I said, you know what? Freedom. Now I don't have to go to church. I don't live with my parents anymore. I can do whatever I want. And for the first year, I did whatever I wanted. And what was so interesting is that you, on the outside, would assume, hey, you got a scholarship to play soccer. You're living now by yourself. You've got friends. You've got influence on the campus, the college campus, at the university I was at. Why wouldn't you be enjoying your life? But something after that year, doing whatever I wanted to do, I felt empty, and I felt like God started to stir up something in my heart and just remind me that what my parents had and what I grew up with was real, and it was tangible. And so I found myself starting to kind of feel that loneliness, that level of like just unsettled, like something you at that time I probably wouldn't have articulated it like this, but something internally in your soul was longing for something real because it saw it once on the outside and now it was ready to receive. And so I had a friend at that time who just gave his life to Jesus, who was a phenomenal soccer player, and he was a few years older than me. And he said, I just gave my life to Christ. And of course I kind of gave hey, I'll go to church, but they could see that on a Sunday I wasn't. And he was like, well, you know what? I just gave my life to Jesus this past summer, and I want to go to church. You want to come with me? And that began a journey of God calling me not only home, but a few months after coming to church, I gave my life to Jesus. It was one of those radical transformations. I don't know about you, but like sometimes whenever you experience God, A.W. Tozer kind of calls it like, he's a radical transformation, and then he calls it like over time transformation. And for me, it was as if like something flipped. The next day, I was deleting numbers in my phone number that I didn't need to have. I was like thinking about what I shouldn't say. Like it just felt like, wow, something just shifted. I could sense something shifted. And I remember being that night, the day I gave my life to Jesus, for some reason my mom was in town in college, and she said, hey, something's different about you. And of course that night I was able to share with her, hey, today actually in the morning I made a personal decision to follow Jesus, and it felt like just something internally shifted. And so from that point on, I just found myself desiring not only to be in the house of God, but also to be a part of the local church and to serve it. And so kind of the rest of that is history. And it's been amazing to see all that God has done.
Yeah, and brilliant. And where were you living at that point? Were you in Florida or somewhere else?
So I was living, kind of, maybe I'll just dive in kind of the family and origin a little bit. So
yeah,
just kind of
tell us a wee bit about
context.
that.
Yeah, so I was born in Ukraine.
Wow.
And born in Ukraine and moved here when I was a little kid. I was a few years old. I had an older brother, younger brother. We moved to Seattle and lived there for about 10 years almost, and then we moved to North Carolina. So it was like west coast of the U.S. all the way to the other coast. As people in the U.S. would say, the best coast is the East Coast. And so so we moved to the East Coast to North Carolina. Asheville's a little mountain town, and so that's where I was at currently before I went off to college. That's where I grew up. I actually grew up in a Ukrainian church. So up until about I went to college, I grew up in a Ukrainian church. They spoke Russian, Ukrainian, Slavic people. That was the church, a Slavic church, and so when I went off to college, I went to Tennessee, actually, to Tennessee University out there, and that's where I graduated from.
Yeah. Well, we'll find out a little bit more about your family in a moment. So obviously you play soccer, and you were hoping to do that as well as part of your career. We'll not dig into that too much, but hey, if Nathan had been on with us, Nathan normally on the show with me, and he's really into football, as we call it.
I was wondering where Nathan was. I was like, where's Nathan?
Yeah. Well, he had a few things on, so he does send his apologies.
I get it.
Because really, he was the person to talk to you about the football stuff, the soccer. Like it's like that for me. Do you know what I mean? So I just have to send the apologies there. You can DM him personally and find out about all things football because he loves it. He's still playing and all that sort of stuff. But find out about him. So obviously you probably do some sports. What else do you do for fun? Come on, our listeners love to find out about the guests who are on and what they do for fun.
You know what? I still love to play, so I still like to play. I don't play enough. Yeah. When you get married, you have kids, and then you lead a church. There's not a lot of time for it. And I got an 8-month-old as our first kid, so my hobbies right now are changing diapers and hanging out with Emerson. But when I don't do that, or before he showed up, I'd play a little golf. I love some golf.
Okay.
And I love playing some football, soccer, as we would say here in the U.S. And the rest of the world, has it right. For some reason, in the U.S. we say soccer. Don't ask me. We don't need to spend time on this podcast asking those questions right now.
Let's leave that for another podcast.
Yeah, that's another one. Also, I just generally love to go with my wife on a day off, just to go to a couple of coffee shops, and get some coffee. I love coffee. Her and I love to explore new places with some coffee shops. So those are the few things. Love to go to the gym whenever I feel motivated enough to go. I actually do love going. I just don't go as nearly enough. I'll be honest, not in the best rhythm right now. This 8-month-old's changed things in my life.
Listen, there's seasons for everything, and you never know. By the end of this podcast, we could make it into a new rhythm. Who knows what can happen, even on a podcast?
That's it. That's it.
Anything can take place. But listen,
you're about to make me do some jumping jacks. Is that what you're saying?
Jumping jack, press ups, and maybe a headstand. You never know. but you're having fun with the newborn, your son Emerson. Great, what a great name that is as well. And changing diapers, as you call them in America. We call them nappies. So
I do know that.
Yeah, everything's changed. That.
You know what's funny, Dave?
Go ahead, tell me.
I know that because I had a roommate for about 3 years of my time. He was from Leicester, England.
Yeah, and of course,
Dean Hopewell, good man.
Well, we don't know him, but I'm sure somebody does. Shout out to Dean wherever he is today. Hey, let's dig in a little bit about your family, because obviously you've mentioned born in Ukraine, coming across, and I know when we were chatting offline, just thinking about the podcast and preparing, you were sharing a little bit about your story and your parents and grandparents. Hey, I wonder if you could share a little bit about that, just that journey from where they were to where you ended up.
Absolutely. So my family in the mid-90s moved from Ukraine to Seattle, Washington, as I mentioned earlier, and they moved on a religious refugee visa. So my parents, my mom and dad, my great-grandparents were all persecuted for their faith. And so think, this is before the communist regime fell apart in USSR, and all the Eastern European countries bordering Russia today were all part of this communist regime and demobilized and forced to be a part of this regime. And so I remember my parents, my whole life, really sharing a lot of the stories. But specifically the reason we moved was because even my great-grandfather, who was a preacher, spent 10 years in prison for preaching the gospel.
Wow.
And, my parents could not make anything above a D in school because they were Christians. And even later on, when some towns and municipalities started to kind of, always try to make money or a buck or two here off of Christians, some would allow. My mom wouldn't. She had to go to church somewhere in the woods and somewhere hiding out because the KGB agents would be looking for people, anyone who was practicing their faith openly. A lot of this was to oppress and avoid any type of revolt and the fear of that. And so it was very fear-driven. And but my dad, who grew up more closer to Poland, he started towards later on, kind of as he's later of his teen years into his adult years. My dad's father actually was the one that would be like working between the municipality and the church that they tried to have. So they had a little bit more of a formal gathering, but they had to pay a temple tax. Basically, for every person that went to church, for every member, they had to pay a tax in order for the municipality or the government not to shut the church down. So basically, that was his experience. Now, it wasn't always like that. His similar experience to my mom growing up, there wasn't a place to gather at all. You would have to hide. But my mom lived kind of towards the capital, so Kiev.
Yeah.
But my dad lived more out in the countryside before they met each other, of course. And so I say this to say they experienced persecution their whole life up until about 88 to 91. So I was born in 91. My older brother was born in 88 when the communist regime fell apart. And so this experience that my parents had really shaped the rest of my life, if I'm honest. And so, because you got to think about the reason they transitioned or the reason they wanted to move wasn't because they hated their country, they hated their nationality, hated where they were from. It was just simply, hey, we want a better opportunity for our kids. We want our kids to grow up in a country where they experience freedom to practice their religion, their faith. Ultimately, it was their faith. And so my parents not only wanted to see that for us, but of course wanted a better opportunity.
Sure.
And so, I think about it. We moved, like I said, in the mid-90s to Seattle with my parents moved with just a couple suitcases, didn't know the language. And ultimately what that kind of followed was my mom and dad had a few uncles that moved, and my mom's mom and dad moved. My whole dad's side is still in the Ukraine, even today.
Still today.
And so, still today. So it's just my mom's side that ended up moving. My dad's side kind of felt like they wanted to stay home where they were, kind of on the countryside on the west side of Ukraine. So I share this kind of background because it really shaped my life and my faith, and I believe where I stand today. I'm sure we'll chat a little bit more about that, but I think I look back at that and think I still sometimes have to remind myself that I'm standing on on really generations of faith that really fought, and their faith was tested. And so anything that I feel like I'm stepping into it because there's people that have gone before me. My family have gone before me that have had to slay some giants in order for us to experience the grace that I've experienced in my life and the freedom that I've experienced in my life. And honestly, a lot of the wisdom and knowledge or biblical foundation that I'm standing on, values that I think are just unshakable. And I'm like, why do I make certain? I'm not saying I'm getting it right. I'm making plenty of mistakes in my life and still do today. But the reality is there's something that my heart was going back to even when I was in college. That I just heard just these incredible miracles that you're like, this is not real. These can't be real stories. I've heard about them, but this is my family. So that was just that kind of faith.
Yeah, I mean, thanks for sharing some of those details. I mean, around the persecution, and a couple of times you've mentioned, how this has shaped your life. I wonder if we could just dig into that a little bit and tell us how has it shaped your life, and also what are the qualities that you've seen in your parents, grandparents, that you're thinking, hey, I've got to take those into my life. That's got to be part of my legacy going forward.
You know what? I think a big part of the qualities that helped shape me from my great-grandparents, my grandparents, and my parents would be this unshakable faith, just the belief that God can do something. If I saw, even to bring it to our context in the U.S., not just this Ukraine and persecution and something that may be even more relatable to us is that even my parents, who moved here with just a couple suitcases, had a lot of challenges, whether it be financial challenges, language, barriers, getting assimilated into a community that doesn't necessarily know you very well and you don't know them very well. Yeah. And I saw parents who would do anything to prioritize God in their life. I would say from my parents, most of at least from ever since I can remember, I guess you would say, whether it was in Seattle, Washington, or in Asheville, North Carolina, or even still today, my parents will do anything to prioritize to get to the house of God.
Amazing.
There was something about saying Sunday morning was a priority to us. And a lot of the Sunday morning as a priority to us came from Monday through Saturday. I don't remember a time that I wouldn't wake up. My dad would be the first one to wake up very early. 6 a.m. and quite honestly, if I would be real, it was I hated it because he would be up so early and he would be singing every hymn. He would I knew all the hymns that he'd be singing. They're all in Ukrainian, and he'd be just walking around the house, and you would think he's having the happiest day. Wow. But I also knew some circumstances we were going through as a family, and it didn't add up. My dad was out of work during the recession of 2006, 7, and 8 in the U.S. Wow. And for a couple of years, just barely having any work. We were barely paying bills. I mean, we're almost out in the street, but haven't paid the mortgage in months. And here is my dad walking around as if life's good, singing songs. And then I would see him reading the Bible in the same place at the kitchen table, or I'd see my mom sitting at the same table, reading the Bible individually, not one or the other. They would both be reading at the same time, or hearing my mom pray when I'd get off the bus. I'm talking 8th grade, 9th grade, 10th grade, about 50 yards from my house, maybe even more, 70 yards from my house. I could hear my mom praying as I get off the bus. She'd be praying by my older brother's name, me, my younger brother, especially me. She's like, this boy really needs prayer. My younger brother. And I'm walking in, and it wasn't one of those things. I don't remember my parents ever feeling like, man, why are my parents praying? Sometimes it was like, man, my mom's really praying. Like, is there not something else they could be doing? But then there's also something internally in me that had a lot of respect for my parents for having a faith that was real. And my parents would say they've made plenty of mistakes, whether it be how they'd parent us, and they apologized to him about some of those as we entered our college years. But I say that to say a lot of the qualities that I learned is that my great-grandfather was willing to die to preach the gospel. He went to prison for 10 years. This isn't just like some story you read. It's my heritage, my family, just a few generations ago, where he was willing to die, had 8 kids at home and a wife that he left. In a time where you couldn't have a job. In a time that was very impossible for a female to work. Wow. With 8 kids, how are you going to feed him? And the crazy story about that is whenever he was not bargaining, but kind of having this conversation with God. This is my great grandfather. His name was Herasim, and he was saying, "Hey, how could I keep preaching? I'm worried that who's going to take care of my family." And God told him, "Hey, if you take care of my church, I'll take care of your family."
Wow.
So he kept preaching the gospel. So when he went to prison for 10 years, there was someone that kept leaving milk and bread at his doorstep where his wife and kids were.
Wow.
Every single morning. My parents would tell me that as they heard this story, they said to this day they have no idea who were leaving. Every single morning when they'd wake up, there was bread and milk for the kids and the wife.
Amazing.
And so that kind of faith, as I heard these stories, it just, you're as a kid growing up thinking, well, God is real.
Yeah,
my parents wouldn't be making up these stories. And so I think it transferred something I can articulate on one end, and then on the other, I cannot articulate. I can just experience.
Yeah. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And I guess good to have that perspective in there, because that's one of the things you're highlighting. And I wonder, just, as you think about that sort of experience, that background, having to deal with adversity, challenges, how is that now shaping you as a leader? So you're in Elevation Church Orlando, slightly different challenges, I would imagine, there in different ways.
Right.
But there's got to be stuff in you that says, hey, there's something about my leadership that actually, because of my background, that causes me to live this way. I wonder if we could dig into that a little bit.
Dave, I think about it all the time. I still think about it today. I mean, this past Sunday, I was getting up and getting the opportunity at the end to facilitate and create a moment for people to accept Jesus for the first time.
Wonderful.
I said to myself, how am I doing this? And how did I get here? And, I think some of the things that I see myself doing, like communicating in front of people, or preaching or teaching or leading or pastoring, I never thought I would be doing it. I never wanted to do it. My mom and dad would tell me I would be a pastor, and I just resisted it. And then here I am doing the very thing I resisted most of my life that I heard.
Wow.
And so I think the thing that was, I guess whether you'd call it infused in me or passed down generationally, was, as simply as I could put it, is just this unshakable faith.
Brilliant.
This belief, this ability that I don't even understand myself when I do it, is just to communicate something that's in me internally. You know how Jeremiah says it's like a fire shut up in my bones. The moment I gave my life to Jesus, I'll tell you this, Dave, people don't believe me. I didn't like to communicate in front of people. I still technically don't like to communicate in front of people. I don't have this like, I want to get up in front of people and talk. It makes me, I do it a lot of times, and I say this to say, not like this false humility. I really just never wanted to be in front of people. I didn't like doing presentations. I would stumble with my words. There were so many things about being in front of people that I would rather just be not called on. And maybe a lot of that stemmed from being a Ukrainian first, learning the language, and then having to learn English in a school that was like, well, you're just going to be made fun of because you can't read properly or talk properly, or grammar's off, or whatever it may be. So I tried to sit back most of my life in school. And when I gave my life to Jesus, it was as if everything in me unlocked.
Wow.
And I'm like, where'd this come from? I never knew it was inside me. I not only wanted to share the gospel and get in front of people and share about who Jesus and what he did in my life, but when I was doing a presentation about law, because I was studying political science and pre-law in school, my teachers were like, hold on a second. Last semester, we couldn't get you to say anything, but all of a sudden now so my teacher would have asked me, and I said, well, crazy story. I gave my life to Jesus, and here's what happened. All of a sudden, I'm doing this. So now I'm sharing about my faith to the teachers, because the teachers see this 180 shift in my life.
Yeah.
I think my parents did the hard work then, and whether I knew this or not, something about what your parents, if I'm speaking to parents right now, that you're doing is infusing into your child. The Bible, you could see it, that Jesus and in the Old Testament, it showed that he's a generational God. He would put something in someone, and that generation will be passed down. It doesn't always have to be a pastor. It could be a plumber. It could be a builder. It could be a communicator of sorts. It could be a business leader. I don't know what it is, but God passes, a dentist, a doctor, it passes down because God's using that occupation or that gift or talent to be able to do something. So yes, in my family, a family of preachers and ministry and church builders, it whether I resisted or run from it, it was in me. So I can't take credit for it. It's like If anything, my parents invested this into me, and I didn't even want it.
Yeah, yeah.
So here I am, just going to do it now.
Yeah.
So I guess I would say just the desire to build God's church,
Yeah.
and the love for the local church, no matter the hardship that's in front of us.
Yeah.
And so I think that part of me, that grit, that desire to build God's church, was
Yeah.
just passed down, and I'm just living in it.
Yeah. And for you then, obviously we've mentioned a few times you're now part of Elevation Church in Orlando, in the sunny spot of the world. Not that we're jealous or anything by any means of the sunshine. But just tell us a little bit about that story. How did you end up in that role? And I guess I want to find out what's been the highlights and what's been the challenges for you. You can't mention COVID, okay? That's sort of so you got to leave that somewhere.
We all know.
Because we're past that. But come on, let's think of your journey there, your role, because, I mean, you've described there, because of your family background, that sort of grit and determination within you, fantastic. Lesson for lots of parents just to hear that our lives shape those around us. I think that's a leadership gifting as well within us. But let's dig in a little bit more. Tell us about your journey to Elevation, your role, some of the highlights and some of the challenges.
Absolutely. Love that question. Similar to what I've been saying, I kind of just woke up and here I am. I'm like, how did I get here? But if I do go back and say, how did I get here? I did my undergrad in political science and law because I figured, if I'm pursuing this dream of becoming a soccer player, I also, if I don't become that, I need an education of some sort while I'm here. Yeah. So I finished my undergrad, but in that process, like I said, I gave my life to Jesus, and a lot of that started to reshape values, beliefs, and desires.
Brilliant.
And so I started to serve the local church in my undergrad while I was at university. And about towards the end, I realized that I had a passion for the local church. Yeah. I didn't know I wanted to be on staff or a pastor or anything like that. But as I was studying, finishing up, I was a part of my Ukrainian church. Okay, so I still was coming out, I was closer to home, still there. And I realized, hey, there's everything's in Ukrainian. I want to do something in English for people who are my age, because I started to see the mass exodus of young people from the church. And so I was like, you know what, I'm going to do something. That was kind of the starting point for me of getting involved in ministry. And as I was doing that, I was graduating my undergrad, and I was like, you know what, I want to get equipped. I have a passion for ministry and the Bible, but I just want to get equipped, not because I want to be a pastor or on staff of some sorts. I just want to know what I'm doing and kind of solidify that with some biblical knowledge. And so I went to Bible college for 2 years, and there in Bible college met the love of my life, Jess, and we got married. And before I left, though, for Bible college, this would have been 2013, I ended up coming to Elevation Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. My younger brothers who brought me, so we drove 2 hours from Asheville east to Charlotte. And the first day I got there, I was met as a first-time guest, turned our flashers on, and was met at the front. We parked, told us where to park because we were first-time guests. And the person that came out to meet me, incredible lady, I won't ever forget her. Her name is Sharon, and she said, "Hey, welcome to Elevation Church. So glad you're here." And she walked me in with my brother. We sat down and felt like God spoke to me through Pastor Stephen, just in a way that you just knew like God was doing something significant in this place. Never did I think I'd be part of the church at that point in 2013. 6 months later, in 2014, I ended up going to college. Well, when I got married, Jess and I were like, hey, we know we're going to be back home. We're going towards Asheville. My younger brother was actually starting what they called a watch party in Asheville, North Carolina. Okay. Where people would be tuning in online in Asheville. There wasn't a physical location. I was like, you know what? Jess and I were like, we feel called to this church. Let's move there and help be a part of that. Well, when I did that, we were there for 6 months helping see God do incredible things in this small home from 40 people. It grew to about 150 people. And around that time, the church approached Jess and I and said, hey, would you ever consider coming on staff? I said no the first time because I just wasn't sure about vocational ministry. And then another person, which you know, his name was Sweb.
Yeah, Sweb.
Stephen Webb.
Sweb.
He came up to me and he said, hey, listen. And he put it this way. He said, listen, if you just keep playing around, we're just going to staff this campus and we're just going to move on. So if you feel like God's calling you into ministry, you're going to have to make a faith decision. And so I said to myself, you know what? I probably should actually pray about this and do this. Sweb's version of this is that I was working at a law firm at that time.
Right.
Sweb's story is that he got me fired. Okay. The reality is they overstaffed and they had to lay people off. But I wasn't going to make a decision. So my version is I got laid off, which I ended up getting laid off because they overstaffed. And that was my decision. I basically ended up going to Charlotte, North Carolina in 2017 and came on at Charlotte for 6 months. And they moved me to Melbourne, Florida in 2017 to be a part of the campus there. And then about 2019, out of nowhere, they asked me, Jess and I, my wife and I, to come to Orlando to help launch Elevation Church in Orlando. And I was like, nope, anyone but me. There are 14 people right there that I think can do it. And God's like, no, Peter, it's you. And so they said, nope, it's you. And so we said, you know what, we'll pray about it. It took us about 2 days. And in all the fear and all there's so many better people to do this. But we ended up praying and saying, hey, if it's going to take a lot of faith to do that, it's probably something we should do because we want to grow. And so my wife and I said yes. And so that's how we ended up getting here. We ended up starting this location with 12 people in a living room. And in 2019, and in 2020 we launched. In 2020 we launched the church in February of 2020. And so kind of speaking to the highs and lows, there's plenty of them, Dave, plenty of them.
Be good. Hey, listen, it has been brilliant to have you on the show, and thanks for being with us. Hey, if people want to connect with you or find out more about you, where can they find you?
I think the simplest way, and I'll give one place, is my Instagram. I think you go in there, direct message me. My handle is P, and then my last name is Buzyan, Buzyan. You'll find me right there.
And before you go then, and the pronunciation and the spelling of your name, is different. The reason I'm saying this is because I know when I put the script out there or the stuff out there about the podcast, people will be thinking they've misspelled that. So can you please explain how your name is spelt and why is it spelled that way? So people don't come to me and say, hey, Dave, what's happened at your end? Yeah, what have you done?
Hey, what's happening? Are you losing it? It's spelled Petr. You say it Peter. Technically, you could say it. Well, technically, it's Petr or Petr, which is how you would say it. Petr.
Yeah.
But I go by Peter, and it's spelled Petr. And the reason it's spelled Petr, even when I moved to the U.S., is that the embassy translated not name to name, but letter for letter, and my name is 4 letters in the Ukrainian language. So
we've said that. We've nailed that. We've nailed it. So we're all right. Hey, listen, great to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us today. And thanks to all our listeners who've been listening to this, watching it, wherever you're watching this from. We just want to say to people, thanks for connecting into the podcast. Head onto the website. You can find out more resources, icon.church/open. Lots of free resources there for church leaders, for people to dip into. So if you want to find out more about what we're doing as well, head on over to the website. But you can find us and subscribe to us at all the major platforms. So thanks for being with us in the Church Explain podcast.